Radha. Chapter 4. How shall I serve you? I have every hope that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher if you serve the mission to inculcate the novel impression of Lord Chaitanya's teachings to the people in general, as well as philosophers and religionists. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, in a letter to Srila Prabhupada, December 1936. In October of 1932, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur led a group of hundreds of disciples and pilgrims in parikram or circumambulation of the sacred places of Vrindavan. Vrindavan residents and visitors perform parikram by following the old dry bed of the Yamuna River and circumambulating the Vrindavan area, stopping at the places where Krishna performed his pastimes when he roamed in Vrindavan 5,000 years ago. Abai had wanted to attend Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's parikram, but couldn't because of his work. Nevertheless, on the 20th day of the pilgrimage, he travelled from Allahabad, intent on seeing Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati again, and hoping to join the parikram party at Kosi, just outside Vrindavan, at least for a day. The parikram Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had organised was one of the biggest ever seen in Vrindavan. By engaging so many people, he was using the parikram as a method of mass preaching. Even as early as 1918, when he had first begun his missionary work, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's specific contribution had been his emphasis on preaching. Prior to his advent, Vaishnavas had generally avoided populated places, and they had performed their worship in holy, secluded places like Vrindavan. Even when they had travelled to preach, they would maintain the simple mode of the impoverished mendicant. The Goswami followers during Lord Chaitanya's time had lived in Vrindavan underneath trees, one night under one tree, the next night under another. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, whose aim was on preaching worldwide, knew that the renunciation of the Goswamis was not possible for Westerners. Therefore, he wanted to introduce the idea that devotees could even live in a big palatial temple. He had accepted a large donation from a wealthy Vaishnava merchant, and in 1930 had constructed a large marble temple in Bag Bazaar section of Calcutta. In the same year, he had moved, along with many followers, from his small rented quarters at Ultadunga to the impressive new headquarters. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was demonstrating that although a devotee should not spend a cent for his own sense gratification, he could spend millions of rupees for the service of Krishna. While previously Vaishnavas would not have had anything to do with introduced by the British, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, on the authority of scripture, was demonstrating a higher understanding. It was Rupa Goswami, the great disciple of Lord Chaitanya, who had written, quickly detached from all materialistic worldly entanglement, not when one gives up everything, when one employs everything for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. This is understood to be perfect renunciation in yoga. If everything is God's energy, then why should anything be given up? If God is good, then his energy is also good. Material things should not be used for one's own sense enjoyment, but they could and should be used for the service of Krishna. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted to invite worldly people to hear Krishna Katha in gorgeously built temples. And for their preaching, devotees should not hesitate to ride in the best conveyances, wear sewn cloth, or live amidst material opulence. It was in this spirit that he had constructed the building at Bag Bazaar, and there a series of dioramas assembled from finely finished, painted and dressed clay dolls. Such dolls are a traditional art form in Bengal, with the staging of nearly 100 elaborate displays depicting the Vaishnava philosophy and the pastimes of Lord Krishna had never before been seen. The theistic sensation, and thousands attended it daily. In that same year, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had taken about 40 disciples on a parikram all over India, a tour featuring many public lectures and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's meetings with important men. By 1932, he had 3 presses in different parts of India, printing 6 journals in various Indian dialects. In Calcutta, a politician had asked Srila how he could possibly print his Nadia Prakash as a daily newspaper. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had replied that it was not so amazing if one considered that in Calcutta alone there were almost half a dozen ordinary daily newspapers, although Calcutta was but one city amongst all the cities of India. India was but one nation amongst many nations on the earth. The earth was but an insignificant planet amidst all the other planets in the universe. This universe was one amongst universes so numerous that each was like a single mustard seed in a big bag of mustard seeds, and the entire material creation was only one small fraction of the creation of God. Nadia Prakash was not printing the news of Calcutta or the earth, but news from the unlimited spiritual sky, which is much greater than all material worlds combined. So if the daily Calcutta newspapers could report limited earthly tidings, then small wonder that Nadia Prakash could appear daily. In fact, the newspaper about the spiritual world could be printed every moment were there not a shortage of interested readers. Adibal. Next.
One of the Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's publication was in English, The Harmonist, and it advertised the Vrindavan Parikrama of 1932, circumambulation of Sri Brajamandal. His Divine Grace Paramahamsa Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, the spiritual head of the Madhva Gaudiya Vaishnava Sangh community following Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's, has been pleased to invite the cooperation of all persons of every nationality, irrespective of caste, creed, color, age, or sex, in the devotional function of the circumambulation of the holy sphere of Braja in the footsteps of Supreme Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya, who exhibited the Leela of performing the circumambulation of Sri Brajamandal during the winter of 1514 AD. When Abhay had heard from the member of the Allahabad Gaudiya Math about the parikrama, he had been fully occupied with his local Prayag pharmacy business and traveling to secure new accounts. But he had calculated how he could join at least for a day or two, and he had fixed his mind on again obtaining the darshana of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Srila Prabhupada. I was not initiated at the time of parikrama, but I had very good admiration for these Gaudiya Math people. They were very kind to me, so I thought, what are these people doing in this parikrama? Let me go. So I met them. The parikrama party traveled with efficient organization. An advanced group bringing all the beddings and tents would go ahead to the next day's location, where they would make camp and set up the kitchen. Meanwhile, the main party, bearing the deities of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and accompanied by Kirtana singers, would visit the place of Lord Krishna's pastime in the evening, arrive in camp. The camp was divided into sections and arranged in a semicircle, and pilgrims were assigned to a particular section for this night. In the center were the quarters of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and the deity of Lord Chaitanya, and close by the tents of the sannyasis. There were separate camps for ladies and men. Married couples did not stay together. There was also a volunteer crop of gods who stayed up all night patrolling the area. At night, the camp, with its hundreds of tents with gas lights and campfires, resembled a small town, and local people would come to see astonished at the arrangement. In the evening, everyone would gather to hear a discourse by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. The pilgrims would rise early each morning and chant Hare Krishna together. Then, carrying the deity of Lord Chaitanya, they would set out in procession, Kirtana group, the police band, the lead horse, the followed pilgrims. They traveled to the holy places, the birthplace of Lord Krishna, the place where Lord Krishna slew Kamsa, the Adikeshava temple, Radha Kund, Shama Kund, and many others. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's massive pilgrimage had been rolling on with great success when he met with serious opposition. The local temple proprietors in Vrindavan objected to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's awarding the sacred Brahmanical thread to devotees not born in the family of Brahmanas. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, throughout his lecture and writing, repeatedly proven in the Vedic scriptures that that one is a Brahman not by birth, by qualities. He often cited a verse from Sanatana Goswami Hari Bhakti Vilas stating that just as base metal when mixed with mercury can become gold, so an ordinary man can become a Brahmana if initiated by a bona fide spiritual master. He also often cited a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam in which great sage Narada tells King Yudhishthira that if one is born in the family of a Shudra but act as he has to be accepted as a Brahmana. And if one is born in a family of Brahmana but act as a Shudra, he is to be considered as Shudra. Because the prime method of spiritual advancement in the age of Kali is the chanting of the holy name of God. Any person who chants Hare Krishna should be recognized as a saintly person. When the local Pandits approached Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati for discussion, they questioned his leniency, leniency in giving initiation and his awarding the Brahmanical thread and sannyas and dress to person of lower caste. Because of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's scholarly, forceful presentations, the Pandits seemed satisfied with the discussion, but when the Parikrama party arrived at Vrindavan, seven main temples, which had been erected by the immediate followers of Lord Chaitanya, the party found the doors closed. Vrindavan shopkeepers closed their business, and some people even throw stones on the passing pilgrims. But the Parikrama party, led by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, continued in good spirit despite the animosity. And on October 28, the party arrived at Koshi of the treasure of Krishna's father, King Nanda.
Abhay arrived in Mathura by train from Allahabad and approached Kosi by rickshaw. The countryside was full of charm for Abhay. Instead of factories and large buildings, there were mostly forests, and aside from the main paved road on which he travelled, there were only dirt roads and soft sandy lanes. As a Vaishnava, Abhay felt sensations an ordinary man wouldn't. And then he sighted a peacock in the field, its exotic plumage proclaiming the glories of Vrindavana and Krishna. Even a non devotee, however, could appreciate the many varieties of birds, their interesting cries and songs filling the air. Occasionally, a tree would be filled with madly chirping sparrows, making their urgent twilight clamor before resting for the night. Even one unaware of the special significance of Vrindavan of mind in the simple countryside where people built fires from cow manure fuel and cooked their evening meals in the open, their fires adding rich natural smells to the indefinable mixture which was the odor of the earth. There were many gnarled and colorful stretches of flowers, bushes of bright violet camellia, trees bloom with delicate white parijata blossoms, and big yellow kadamba flowers rarely seen outside Vrindavana. On the road, there was lively horse-drawn tanga traffic. The month of Kartika, October to November, was one of the several times of the year that drew many pilgrims to Vrindavana. The one-horse tangas carried large families, some coming from hundreds of miles away. Larger bands of pilgrims, grouped by village, walked together, the women dressed in bright colored saris, brown skinned men and women sometimes singing bhajanas, carrying but a few simple possessions as they headed for the town of Vrindavana. And there were businessmen like Abe dressed more formally, coming from a city maybe to spend the weekend. Most of them had at least some semblance of a religious motive to see Krishna in the temple, to bathe in the holy Yamuna river, to visit the sites where Lord Krishna had performed his pastimes, such as the lifting of Govardhana hill, the killing of the Keshi demon, or the dancing in the evening with the gopis. Abhay was sensitive to the atmosphere of Vrindavana and he noted the activity along the road. But more than that, he cherished with anticipation the fulfillment of his journey, his meeting again after a long separation. The saintly person always thought of within himself Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who had spoken to him in Calcutta and had convinced him of Lord Chaitanya's mission to preach Krishna consciousness. Abhay would soon see him again, and this purpose filled his mind. Upon reaching the lantern illuminated camp of the Gaudiya Math and inquiring at the registration post, he was allowed to join the Parikrama village. He was assigned to a tent of Grihastha men and was offered prasadam. The people were friendly and in good spirits, and Abhay talked of his activities with the Matha members in Calcutta and Allahabad. Then there was a gathering. A sannyasi was making an announcement. This evening, he said, there would be a scheduled visit to a nearby temple to see the deity of Sheshai Sheshashai Vishnu. Some of the pilgrims cheered, Hari Bol, Hare Krishna. The sannyasi also announced that His Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura would speak that evening for the last time and would be leaving the parikrama party the next day. So there was a choice of going on the parikrama or staying for the lecture. Somebody else would like to read?
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada. So I met them in Keshava. Maharaja was informing that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is going to Mathura tomorrow morning and he will speak Hari Katha this evening. Anyone who wants to may remain, or otherwise they may go to see Shesha Vishnu. So at that time, I think only 10 or 12 men remained. Sridhara Maharaja was one of them, and I thought it wise. What can I see at this Seshyasi? Let me hear what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati will speak. Let me hear. When Abhay arrived, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was already speaking. He sat back erect, a shawl around his shoulders, not speaking like a professional lecturer giving a scheduled performance, but addressing a small gathering in his room. At last, Abe was in his presence again. Abe marveled to see and hear him. This unique soul, possessed of Krishna Katha, speaking uninterruptedly about Krishna in his deep, low voice, in ecstasy and deep knowledge. Abe sat and heard with tension. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been speaking regularly about Sambada, Abhitheya, and Prayojana. Sambada is the stage of devotional service in which awareness of God is awakened. Abhitheya is rendering loving service to the Lord, and Prayojana is the ultimate goal, pure love of God. He stressed that his explanations an exact recapitulation of what had originally been spoken by Krishna and passed down through disciplic succession. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's particular utterance, mostly Bengali and English, with frequent quoting of Sanskrit from the Shastras, was deep with erudition. It is Krishna, said Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who is the only Superlord over entire universe and beyond it of Vaikuntha and transcendental region. As such, no one can raise any obstacle his enjoyment. Hare Krishna.
An hour went by, 2 hours. The already small gathering in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's room gradually thinned. A few sannyasis left, except duties connected with the Parikram camp. Only a few intimate leaders remained. Abai was the only outsider. Of course, he was a devotee, not an outsider. But in the sense that he was not a sannyasi, was not handling any duties, was not even initiated, and was not traveling with the Parikram, but had joined only for a day. In that sense, he was an outsider. The philosophy Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was speaking, however, was democratically open to whoever would give an ardent hearing, and that Abai was doing. He was listening with wonder. Sometimes he would not even understand something, but he would go on listening intently, submissively, his intelligence drinking in the words. He felt Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati revealing to him the direct vision of the spiritual world, just as a person reveals something by opening a door or pushing aside a curtain. And this reality was loving service to the lotus feet of Radha Krishna, the supremely worshipful personality of Godhead. How masterfully he spoke, and with utter conviction and boldness. It was with such awe that Abai listened with fastened attention. Of course, all Vaishnavas accepted Krishna as their worshipful Lord, but how conclusively and with what sound logic was the faith of the Vaishnava by this great teacher? After several hours, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati stopped speaking. Abai felt prepared to go on listening without cessation, and yet he had no puzzling doubts or queries to place forward. He wanted only to hear more. As Srila Bhaktisiddhanta made his exit, Abai bowed, offering his obeisances, and then left the intimate circle of sannyasis in their row of tents and went to the outer circle of tents, his mind surcharged with the words of his spiritual master. Now their relationship seemed more tangible. He still treasured his original impression of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the saintly person who had spoken to him on the rooftop in Calcutta. But tonight, that single for years in Allahabad had been enriched and filled with new life. His spiritual master and the impression of his words were as much a reality as the stars in the sky and the moon over Vrindavan. That impression of hearing from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was filling him with its reality, and all other reality was forming itself around the absolute reality of Srila Gurudev, just as all the planets circle around the sun. The next morning, Abai was up with the others more than an hour before dawn, bathed and chanting mantras in congregation. Later in the morning, the tall, stately figure of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, dressed in plain saffron, got into the back seat of a car and drove away from them. Thoughtful and grave, he looked back and waved, accepting the loving farewell gestures of his followers. Abai stood amongst them. A little more than a month later, Abai was again anticipating an imminent meeting with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. this time at Allahabad. Abai had only recently returned from Vrindavan to his work at Prayag Pharmacy when the devotees at the Allahabad Gaudiya Math informed him of the good news. They had secured land and funds for constructing a building, the Sri Rupa Gaudiya Math, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would be coming on November the 21st to preside over the ceremony for the laying of the cornerstone. Sir William Malcolm Haley, Governor of the United Provinces, would be the respected guest, and then a grand ceremony would lay the foundation stone in the presence of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. When Abai learned that there would also be an initiation ceremony, he asked if he could be initiated. Atulananda, the Math's president, assured Abai that he would introduce him to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. At home, Abai discussed his initiation plans with his wife. She had no objection, but she did not want to take initiation herself. They were already worshipping the deity at home and offering their food to the deity. They believed in God and were living peacefully. But for Abai, that was not enough. Although he would not force his wife, he knew that he must be initiated by a pure devotee. Avoiding sinful life, living piously, these things were necessary and good, but in themselves they did not constitute spiritual life and could not satisfy the yearning of the soul. Life's ultimate goal and the absolute necessity of the self was love of Krishna. That love of Krishna his father had already inculcated within him, and now he had to take the next step. His father would have been pleased to see him do it. Jai, someone else like to read?
Can I read?
Yes, please.
From his father was now being solidified by someone capable of guiding all the fallen soul of the world to transcendental love of God. Abai knew he should go forward and take complete shelter in the instruction of his spiritual master and the scriptures enjoin. He who is desirous of knowing the absolute truth must take shelter of his spiritual master who is in disciplic succession and who speaks in Krishna consciousness. Even Lord Chaitanya, who was Krishna himself, had accepted the spiritual master, and only he manifests the full symptom of ecstatic love of Krishna while chanting the holy name. As for the ritual initiation he had received at age 12 from a family priest, Abai had never taken it very seriously. It had been a religious formality, but a guru was not a mere official who Abai had rejected the idea that he already had a guru. He had never received instruction from him in bhakti, and his family guru had not linked him through the disciplic succession with Krishna. But by taking initiation from Bhaktisiddhanta, he would be linked with Krishna. Bhaktisiddhanta, son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and disciple of Gorakishora Das Babaji, was the guru in the 12th disciplic generation from Lord, the foremost Vedic scholar of the age. The expert Vaishnavas who would guide one back to Godhead. He was predecessor to work for the highest welfare by giving everyone Krishna consciousness, the remedy for all suffering. Abai felt that he had already accepted Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as his spiritual master, and that from their very first meeting he had already received his orders. Now, if Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would accept him as his disciple, the relationship would be confirmed. Maybe somebody can read. Maybe somebody else can read.
Would you like to read, Pravina?
He was coming so soon after Abhay had seen and heard him in Vrindavana. That was how Krishna acted through his representative. It was or as it was as if his spiritual master, in coming to where Abhay had his family and business, was coming to draw him further into spiritual life. Without Abhay's having attempted to bring it about, his relationship with Srila Bhaktivedanta was deepening. Now Srila Bhaktivedanta was coming to him as if by a higher arrangement. One on the day of the ceremony, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati met his disciples at Allahabad Gaudiya Math on the South Malacca Street. While he was speaking Hari Katha and taking questions, Atulananda Brahmachari took the opportunity to present several devotees, Abhay amongst them, as a candidate for initiation. The Allahabad devotees were proud of Mr. D, who regularly attended the matha in the evening and had led bhajans, listened to the teaching and spoke them himself, and often brought respectable guests. He had contributed money and he had induced his business colleagues also to do so. With folded palms, Abhay looked up humbly at his spiritual master. He and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta were now face to face. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta recognized him and was visibly pleased to see him. He already knew him. Yes, he said. It with Abhay. He likes to hear. He does not go away. I have marked him. I will accept him as my disciple. At the moment, and the words become impressed into his being, Abhay was in his ecstasy. Atulnanda was that his Gurudeva was already in approval of Mr. D. Other disciples in the room were also pleased to witness Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati immediate acceptance of Mr. D as a good listener. Some of them wonder where Bhaktisiddhanta had arrived at such an estimation of the young pharmacist. At the initiation, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was seated on a bensa, and the room was filled with guests and the members of the Gaudiya Math. Those to be initiated sat around the small mount of the earth, where Saraswati sannyasis prepared a fire, offered grains and fruits into the flames, where everyone chanted mantras for purification. Abhay's sister and brother were present, but not his wife. Abhay basked in the presence of his Gurudeva. Yes, he likes to hear the words of his spiritual master, and his glance of recognition had remained with Abhay. Abhay would praising his spiritual master by hearing well. Then he said, he thought, I will be able to speak well. The Vedic literature describes 9 processes of devotional service, the first of which is Shravanam, hearing about Krishna. When then came Kirtanam, chanting about and glorifying him. By sitting patiently and hearing at Koshi, he had pleased Krishna's representative. And when Krishna's representative was pleased, Krishna was pleased. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had not praised him for donating money to the matha and had not advised him to forsake his family and business and travel with him, nor had he asked Abhay to perform great austerities like the yogis who modify their bodies with the fast and difficult woes. But he likes to hear, he said, he had said, I have marked him. Abhay thought about it again and again and listened carefully as his spiritual master conducted the initiation. Finally, Bhakti Siddhanta called for Abhay to come forward and receive the Harinama initiation by accepting his beads. After offering prostrate obeisances, Abhay extended his right hand and accepted the strand of chappa beads from the hand of his spiritual master. At the same time, he had also received the scared Brahmanical thread, signifying sound second initiation. Usually, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta gave the first initiation Harinama, and only after some time, when he is satisfied with the progress of the disciple, would he give the second initiation. But he offered Abhay both the initiation at the same time. Now Abhay was full-fledged disciple, a Brahman who would perform sacrifice such as fire yagna for initiation. He could worship the deity in the temple, expected to discourse widely. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta added Arvinda lotus to his name. Now he was Abhay Charanavinda. Haribol.
After Srila Saraswati left Allahabad for Calcutta, Abhay keenly felt this responsibility of working on behalf of his spiritual master. At the initiation, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had instructed Abhay to study Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which outlined the loving exchanges between Krishna and his devotees, and explained how a devotee can advance in spiritual life. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu was a law book for devotional service, and Abhay would study it carefully. He was glad to increase his visits to the Allahabad center and to bring new people. Even at his first meeting with his spiritual master, he had received the instruction to preach the mission of Lord Chaitanya, and now he began steadily and carefully considering how to do so. Preaching was a responsibility at least as binding as that of home and business. Even in his home, he wanted to engage as far as possible in preaching. He discussed with his wife about his plans for inviting people into their home, offering them prasadam and holding discussions about Krishna. She didn't share his enthusiasm. Srila Prabhupada: My wife was a devotee of Krishna, but she had some other idea. Her idea was just to worship the deity at home and live peacefully. My idea was preaching. It was not possible for Abhay to travel with his spiritual master, or his pharmaceutical business kept him busy, and he traveled frequently. Whenever possible, however, he tried to time a business trip to Calcutta when his spiritual master was also there. Thus, over the next 4 years, he managed to see his spiritual master perhaps a dozen times. Whenever Abhay visited Calcutta, the assistant librarian Nityananda Brahmachari would meet him at Howrah train station with a 2-horse carriage belonging to the mutt. Nityananda saw Abhay as an unusually humble and tolerant person. As they rode together to inquire eagerly into the latest activities of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, his traveling, his publishing, how many centers were currently open, how his disciples were doing. They wouldn't talk much about Abhay's business. Abhay would stay at the Gaudiya Math, usually for about 5 days. Sometimes he would visit one of his sisters who lived in Calcutta, but his main reason for coming was Srila, and Abhay would take advantage of every opportunity to hear him. Abhay didn't try to become a leader in the inner management of the Gaudiya Math. His spiritual master had initiated 18 sannyasis, who carried out most of the preaching and leadership of the mission. Abhay was always the householder, occupied with his own business and family in the Math, except for brief visits. And yet he began to develop a close relationship with his spiritual master. Sometimes Abhay would go to see him at the Chaitanya Math, at the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya in Mayapur. One day at the Chaitanya Math, Abhay was in the courtyard when a large poisonous snake crawled out in front of him. Abhay called out for his godbrothers, but when they came, everyone simply stood looking, uncertain what to do. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta came out on the veranda of the second floor, glanced down, saw the snake, and immediately ordered, "Kill it." A boy then took a large stick and killed the snake. Srila Prabhupada: So I thought, how is it that Guru Maharaj ordered the snake to be killed? I was a little surprised, but later on I saw this verse, and then I was very glad. Modita sadhur api vrischika sarpa hatya. Saintly persons take pleasure in the killing of a scorpion or a snake. It had remained a doubt how Guru Maharaj ordered the snake to be killed, but when I read this verse, I was that this creature or creatures like the snake should not be shown any mercy. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was reputed to be so austere and so strong in argument against other philosophies that even his own disciples were cautious in approaching him if they had no specific business with him. Yet, even though Abhay's contact with him was quite limited, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would always treat him kindly. Srila Prabhupada: Whenever I met my Guru Maharaj, he would always treat me very affectionately. My godbrothers would criticize because I would talk a little freely with him, and they would quote this English saying, "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." But I would think, fool? Well, maybe, but that is the way I am. My Guru Maharaj was always very, very affectionate to me. When I offered obeisances, he used to return, "Dasosmi, I am your servant." Sometimes as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta paced back and forth, chanting the Hare Krishna mantra aloud while fingering his beads, Abhay would enter the room and also chant, walking alongside his spiritual master. Once when Abhay entered Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's room, his spiritual master was sitting on a couch, and Abhay on an equal level. But then he noticed that all the other disciples in the room were sitting on a lower level at their spiritual. Abhay kept his seat, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said nothing of it. But Abhay never again sat on an equal level with his spiritual master. Would someone else like to read?
Once in a room with many disciples, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was speaking and Abhay listening when an old man beside Abhay motioned to him. As Abhay leaned over to hear what the man wanted, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta suddenly spoke out in annoyance at the two apparently inattentive students. "Babu," he first addressed the old man, "do you think you have purchased me with your 150 rupees per month donation?" And then turning to Abhay, "Why don't you come up here and speak instead of me?" Abhay was outwardly mortified, yet he treasured the rebuke. It was in a private meeting that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta once told Abhay of the risk he took by preaching boldly. Srila Prabhupada: My Guru Maharaj's contribution is that he defeated the caste Goswamis. He defeated this Brahmanism. He did it the same way as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did. As Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Kiba Vipra, Kiba Nyasi Sudrakene Naya, Ye Krishna Tadva Veta, Say Guru Haya." There is no consideration whether one is a sannyasi, a brahmana, a sudra, or a grihastha. No, anyone who knows the science of Krishna, he is all right. He is Goswami and he is brahmana. But no one else thought that since Lord Chaitanya, this was my Guru Maharaj's contribution, and for this reason he had to face so many vehement protests from these Brahmana caste Goswamis. Once they conspired to kill him, my Guru Maharaj told me personally, by his grace, when we used to meet alone, he used to talk about so many things. He was so kind that he used to talk with me, and he personally told me that these people, they wanted to kill me. They collected 25,000 rupees and went to bribe the police officer in charge of the area, saying, You take these 25,000 rupees, we shall do something against Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and you don't take any steps. He could understand that they wanted to kill him, so the police officer frankly came to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Of course, we accept bribes, and we indulge in such things, but not for a sadhu, not for a saintly person. I cannot dare. The police officer refused and said to my Guru Maharaja, you take care, this is the position. So vehemently they protested. But he liked boldness in his disciples. Abhay heard of an occasion when one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciple had been very outspoken at a public meeting and had denounced a highly regarded Mayavadi monk as a foolish priest. The remark had caused a disruption at the meeting, and some of the disciples reported the incident to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, thinking he would be displeased that his disciple had caused a disturbance. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was pleased and remarked, he has done well. His displeasure occurred rather when he heard of someone's compromise. Srila Prabhupada, when my Guru Maharaj was present, even big with even his beginning students. My Guru Maharaj was called Living Encyclopedia. He could talk with anyone on any subject. He was so learned and no compromise. His so-called saints, avatars, yogis, everyone who was false was an enemy to my Guru Maharaj. He never compromised. Some God brothers complained that this preaching was a chopping technique and it would not be successful, but those who criticized him fell down. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was known as the Simha, lion, guru. On occasion when he saw someone he knew to be a proponent of impersonalism, he would call that person over and challenge. Why are you cheating the people with Mayavadi philosophy? He would often tell his disciple not to compromise. Why should you go flatter? He would say. You should speak the plain truth. Without any flattery, money will come anyway. Whenever Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wrote or spoke the Vaishnava philosophy, he was uncompromising. The conclusion was according to the Shastra and the logic strong. But sometimes Abhay would hear his spiritual master express the eternal teachings in a unique way that Abhay knew he would never forget. Don't try to see God, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would say, but act in such a way that God sees you. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta condemned temple proprietors who made a business of showing the deity for a living. To be a sweeper in the street was more honorable, he said. He coined a Bengali phrase, Dwara Badam Banga, meaning the Shalagram deity as a stone for cracking nuts. In other words, if a person shows the Shalagram form of the Lord or any form of the deity simply with a view to make money, then he is seeing the deity not as the Lord but as a stone, a means for earning his livelihood. Would someone else like to read?
Are we all the way around again?
Yeah, please.
Go on for a few minutes. Abhay had the opportunity to see his spiritual master deal with the nationalists who had been Abhay's schoolmate in Scottish Churches College. Both had come in a somewhat critical mood, concerned about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's recruiting young men into religious life. Srila Prabhupada, Subhas Chandra Bose came to my Guru Maharaj and said, so many people you have captured, they are doing nothing for nationalism. My Guru Maharaj replied, well, for your national propaganda, you require very strong men. But these people are very weak. You can see. So don't put your hands upon them. Let them eat something and chant Hare Krishna. In this way, he avoided them. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta used to say, when the day came when high court judges with Vaishnava tilak on their foreheads, then he would know the mission of spreading Krishna consciousness was becoming successful. He said that Jesus Christ was a Shaktivesh avatar, an empowered incarnation of God. How can it be otherwise, he said. He sacrificed everything for God. In his scholarly language, he declared, the materialistic demeanor cannot possibly stretch to the transcendental autocrat. Sometimes in speech, he phrased it in a more down-to-earth way. The mundane trying to understand the Supreme Lord by their senses and mental speculation are like a person trying to take honey in a bottle by licking the outside of the bottle. Philosophy without religion, he said, is dry speculation, and religion without philosophy is sentiment and sometimes fanaticism. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said that the whole world was simply a society of cheaters and cheated. He gave the example that often visit certain holy places in India, and with the idea of seducing the sadhus, thinking that to have a child by a sadhu is prestigious, and immoral men dress themselves as sadhus, hoping to be seduced by the cheating women. His conclusion, a person should aspire to leave the material world and go back to Godhead, because this material world is not a fit. Abai saw that when disciples asked the spiritual master about something in the future, he never replied, yes, it is going to happen, or yes, we are going to do it. Rather, he would say, yes, if Krishna desires, it may be. Although in his younger years, he had been an astrologer and able to predict the future, he had given it up. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was a lifetime brahmachari and was very strict about avoiding association with women. Once Abai was sitting with his spiritual master when another disciple was present along with his young wife. The wife had asked Srila Bhaktisiddhanta if she might speak with him privately, but he replied, no, whatever it is you can ask here. I cannot see you in private. Abai was impressed by this, since Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was in his 60s and the girl could have been his granddaughter. Regardless, he would not. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta liked to make his disciples into sannyasis, but one day one of his sannyas disciples was forcibly dragged away by his wife. In tears, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta lamented that he was unable to save that soul, yet he did not speak disparagingly of Krishna-conscious family life. I would have had sex hundreds of times if I thought I could raise Krishna-conscious children. He would send his brahmacharis out to sell the Gaudiya Mat magazine and books, and even if brahmachari were able to sell only one or two, it would please him very much, and he would exclaim, you are so nice. In considering whether an essay were worthy for publication, he would count how many times the word Krishna or Chaitanya had been used. If these holy names had been quoted sufficiently, he would say, that's all right, this can be used. Oh, there's just a little bit to go if anyone wants to finish it.
Karuneshwari Mataji.
Haribol, it's not till the end of the chapter, is it? When I see the cursor at the side of the
Oh, I think he means there's going to be a little break, like a little line.
Okay, will I read that little bit then?
Yes, please.
He would say in Bengali, Pran ache yar se hetu prachar. A person must have life to be a preacher. A dead man cannot preach. When some of his preachers who had gone to chant and speak reported that no one had attended their meeting, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta replied, that doesn't matter. The four walls will hear you. That is sufficient. Don't be disappointed. Go on chanting. And in commenting on the fact that some of his disciples had fallen away, some of the soldiers will die, he said. But he did not want his disciples to lead an easygoing life. He once criticized a disciple as being ease-loving, nor should they attempt to practice austerities in seclusion. He would sing a song of his own composition, Dushta Mani Tumi Kishera Vaishnava. My dear mind, what kind of Vaishnava are you? You're chanting Hare Krishna in a solitary place, imitating the great saints Haridas Thakur and Rupa Goswami, but your meditation is actually to think of women and money. Your mind is filled with such dirty things, so your bhajan is simply cheating. He taught that if a devotee gave up his preaching in the city in favor of solitary meditation. That was a method of cheating by imitating the great saints in hopes of getting cheap adoration from others. Therefore, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta never liked to open a branch of the Gaudiya Math in a place that was not very much populated. Abai went on listening to his spiritual master at every opportunity, but rarely did Abai put a philosophical inquiry before him. He preferred simply to listen. Srila Prabhupada, I never asked spiritual master a question. How shall I serve you? Will I stop there then? Bye.
Jai.
Jai.
Yeah.
It's a nice place to stop because that's the title of the chapter.
Yeah.
Me too.
Sarasvati, that was really interesting.
And such a nice explanation. Wow. It's just mind blowing. He's so bold, he's so amazing.
Yeah.
That was nice about the paragram as well. I mean, that's
Yeah.
because I was just thinking. I mean, we went on some of those paragrams with Radhanath Swami. It was the same idea of the householders all going around to all the different places, and the people going in advance parties, and it was really amazing the way that was done, and just to see that practice had started that. And I was also thinking as well when Prabhupada was getting the rickshaw, or from Calcutta, from the Howrah station to the temple, he would be asking the person that was there about all the different preaching arrangements that Bhaktisiddhanta would do in the meantime that he had. You just become filled in, because I'm sure it wasn't on a newspaper, or he couldn't tune in on an app or something like that. So he was asking what he was doing, and then of course afterwards himself, he was doing all those same things, opening up centers in all over America and Europe, and
Yeah.
he was getting a taste at that time.
It's also a nice point, and I remember we discussed it before when we were reading Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, that he was the first person since Lord Chaitanya to really stress this point about Kiba Vipra, Kiba Nyasi, Shudra Kani Nai. It's like, it's not about being a caste Brahmin, it's about being a Vaishnava. Do you remember we